Townsend. I'm with eLearning Brothers. Today our session will be about how to create systems training that drives adoption. This session will be recorded and we'll get a copy of it sent out to everyone who is registered for this session. If you have a question during the webinar, if you'd like to participate one way or the other, please do use that questions panel in your GoToWebinar control panel. We'll try to get to as many of your questions and comments as we can. And if we aren't able to get to all of them, we will try to reach out offline and get those questions answered. All right, so to talk to us about systems training, we have Richard Harmon, Senior Custom Solutions Consultant with us today. Thanks, Richard. We appreciate your time. And without further ado, I'll go ahead and turn the time over to you and pass the screen over to you here.
Perfect. Thank you. Share my screen.
All right, we see it. Thank you.
All right. Well, let's begin. I'm talking about a subject that it's not really near and dear to my heart, but brings a lot of pain based on past experiences. And I'm assuming if you've been involved in a system rollout, some of the challenges associated with that and some of the recent innovations in technology that can minimize some of that pain. I have a series of polling questions, and I'll probably ask some questions that are not associated with the poll, just to kind of get your response in the chat section, so to sort of know where you are and where you're coming from, your experience or lack of experience with systems training. The term digital adoption platforms is a fairly recent term, and what we're going to do is we're going to discuss a little bit about what it is or your perceptions of what it is. We're going to talk about, why we look at digital adoption, and it may be obvious we want to look at some of the points as to why people are spending time and money helping people adopt systems that roll out. We'll look a little bit at some of the methods of system training that are being used in the industry today, some of the challenges associated with that, those traditional methods. We'll look very briefly at digital adoption platforms. This is designed to help you select a platform and introduce the concept of experiential learning and digital adoption. We'll cover those as quickly or as slowly as is appropriate based on questions people have. We ask that you ask questions throughout the course of the webinar so that it's in the context of what we're talking about and you get the information you're looking for versus just the information I'm presenting to you. So, first question, before you answer this poll question, how many of you have been involved in a system rollout where you were involved in training? That's kind of an initial question. If you just in the chat section respond to that to kind of get a sense of those who have been through system training initiatives and have experienced that. And I'm just curious what the response is, if anybody has.
Nobody's putting anything in. I am seeing a couple raised hands, however.
Okay.
So, there are some people. Oh, here's a couple more people saying that they have and we've tried it. Many and currently trained for a software as a service company.
Okay.
Involved. I'm currently involved. I've done it in the past. So
good.
There's a few people here.
So we have people who less experienced and some who are going through it now or have experience. So the first question polling question I want to put out is from your perspective, I'm not looking for right or answer, what is digital adoption? What definition aligns with your perception of what digital adoption is? I just want to kind of get a sense of people's different opinions and perspective.
So you guys can click right on that on the screen. Is it when a company fully leverages digital tools and assets? When you got online or instructor-led training delivered to users prior to the go-live date? How would you define this? When users transfer to and adopt to newer or better systems?
There's obviously some overlap in these definitions, but I want to kind of get a sense of what your perspective is from a holistic perspective of digital adoption. Because in reality, digital adoption is beyond just systems training, but that's what we're going to talk about.
All right, so it looks like most people have voted. I'll go ahead and close this out and show those results. So 48% of our audience said that implementation and adoption of a new software platform or tool, that last one, and 35% voted for the first one, when a company fully leverages digital tools and assets. And then there were other people. There's 13% for when users transfer to and adopt to a newer, better system, and 3% say when the training is delivered, those systems delivered before the go-live date.
Okay, thank you. So the question is why are we looking at digital adoption? Typically, an organization has a sort of a backbone of architecture of systems that they use to run their business, to part of the supply chain, servicing the customer, all those types of things. And usually there are a number of reasons why people look at implementing a new system. And when you implement a new system, you typically want people to adopt it because their ability to use it efficiently and effectively drives the results that the company's seeking when they invest millions of dollars in a new system or multiple systems. And this list of reasons why people are implementing RP would be examples of why you want to look at adoption, because when the platform is not adopted, or the people create workarounds, or they stick with old systems, or they don't use it efficiently, you're not realizing the results that were intended when people invest in that particular adoption. Another polling question. There are statistics by organizations in the industry that gather data from people who are actually implementing new systems as to what actually happens. What's the level of adoption? Why don't you go ahead and run that next polling question? I'm actually going to put it on the screen as well, a little bit more, so you can see it.
Sure. So the poll itself is on the screen, and we'll look at what Richard has in a moment. But you can click right on the screen. Which of these statistics is true according to research by the Panorama Consulting Services found in their ERP report? 52% of ERP initiatives fail to deliver 50% of desired result. 61% of ERP projects take longer than expected. 74% of ERP projects cost more than expected. 59% of ERP customers are happy with their ERP software.
Unhappy.
Or unhappy. Yep. I just want people to be happy, Richard. That's all I want. And then the last one is all of the above. So go ahead and vote there. Looks like we've got a lot of people agreeing on one particular answer. I'll go ahead and close this off and show those results. So 90% of our audience said all of the above. 10% said 61% of ERP projects take longer than expected. So yeah, everybody agrees that it's all of the above.
And in this particular case, based on the data, the answer is all of the above. All of these things are problems associated with ERP, and ERP refers to enterprise resource planning software, which is sort of a system-wide application. It's a term used in the industry. It can be associated with anything, Salesforce, SAP, PeopleSoft, all those types of things are ERP initiatives. So there is an issue here. I mean, they're investing millions of dollars, and they're not realizing, in this case, 50% of the value, the benefit they were expecting is not being realized. And that's a problem. That's a challenge. And training is associated with that challenge. And so what we want to do is look at some of the traditional methods associated with system training rollout. And we won't spend a lot of time on this, but I just want to kind of give you a sense of what I assume you're doing, and actually what I would like to have you do is as we talk through this in the chat section, if you'd indicate which ones you've been involved with or currently use. The first one I'm going to show you is what I call instructor-led training, where you go into a classroom, and typically you will have an application, what we call sandbox. So it's an instance of the application that's being built or has been built, and it's a training database for people to be able to practice in. And so they have a manual next to them, and they're given tasks or business processes, and they're asked to go complete them either with or without learner guidance within the actual live application. When I say live, meaning a training environment, they're not really working with production data. So that's one form. It's usually instructor-led. They're taught, there's a PowerPoint presentation, those types of things. That's one form and pretty consistent form of training. The other one is virtual instructor-led training, where maybe people don't travel to a classroom. There's an instructor through a webinar who will then project on the screen the actual application. They may have a participant guide, and it's a lot of presentation associated with how to use the application to complete the business processes. They may have access to the system, not always. It all depends on its level of maturity, where it is in the development process, but virtual ILT is used to train people how to use systems. And it's a lot of times very role specific, depending on who you are in the organization, what parts of the application you're going to use. The other one is, I'll call it paper-based self-study. So you're given a manual, if you will, and A lot of times this may be a live environment, a training environment, or it may be a simulated environment. So people have created a whole series of tutorials or simulated system transactions, and you're given an opportunity based upon the tasks in front of you to go through and complete them. And depending upon the sophistication of the simulation, there may be learner guidance, there may be feedback, or you may just get click here, or those types of things. And typically, anytime you get involved in a simulation-based system training environment, you're going to have multiple methods of being able to experience it. So you may have the ability to have it shown to you. In fact, I'm going to play one of these to kind of give you a sense of what it's like. This happens to be a banking system. And this one is a little bit different in that it sort of gives some context. It presents a business challenge by a person, and then they're given specific assignments of where to go into the system. In this case, there's learner guidance. It shows them where to click, those types of things. So in a systems training, you'll have a demo where it's a video of step by step by step going through the system. You may have a try it activity where you're given a task, and then in a simulated system environment, you're asked to complete that transaction, and usually no guidance unless you make a mistake. And then there's a do it activity where it's basically an assessment. It's a test where you have a simulated system environment, and you're given a task, and you click and do all the things you're supposed to do, either navigate or fill in data, and it keeps track of those things. You don't really know whether you're getting it right or not until you get to the end result. It's more of a testing environment, but they're all built in simulated system environments. This happens to be a gaming type activity that I just showed you, where people are scored and timed to do a very quick task of being able to demonstrate their knowledge of the high level place they're supposed to go in order to complete a particular task. This one example is system simulations. So how many of you have built, this is just another chat question, how many of you have built system simulations before for training, whether either showing how to do something, giving them a chance to try it, or being tested and assessed and tested in that?
Quite a few yeses are coming in. There's another one that says all the time.
All the time.
That's all I do.
Okay, well, that makes sense.
There's another comment here. How complex do these need to be before we can say a yes? There's some people that have built very basic system simulations.
No, basic is fine. Yeah, it all depends on your needs or your time and budget constraints, because usually you build the best solution you have within the constraints you have, and that makes sense. Yeah, so it doesn't have to be sophisticated.
There's another comment that says we no longer do the simulations. I'm sure that's a time constraint issue.
Yeah, and that makes sense. A lot of time, I used to create tutorials where I basically did screen captures in a manual, and people just use that in the live system to be able to try and complete their job. And I'm going to show you some things that have evolved because of advances in technology, where you don't create the simulations per se that are separate from the application itself, but they're actually embedded within the application. They actually become performance support while you're on the job. So you're not looking at a screen that has a simulation and then going back to the live system. They're actually integrated together. And then the last one is a blended solution, where you maybe have people go in a classroom experience, and before they go into the classroom, they may go through some e-learning that teaches some high-level concepts about the new system, some business processes, and in the classroom they actually perform those transactions either in a simulated environment or in a what we call a sandbox, a training environment. But it's blended. It's not just e-learning. It's not just classroom. So let's look at some of the challenges of traditional systems training. Well, one of the first ones that I experienced was as a training department, we were the sort of the tail end of things. From a sequence perspective, because we were implementing training at the end of the application development before it went live, but also from a perspective of being involved in the planning of it. So there was a project software was agreed to be purchased. They went through a requirements phase and identifying business transactions and workflow. And we were never involved in that. We never had a seat at the table, if you will, of how training should be implemented within the system. It was just sort of a given. Yeah, there'll be some training at the end, and they'll figure it out when the time comes. And that's important because one is it was an indication of our level of credibility. We were an afterthought, and they didn't realize how important training was, or performance support, or experiential learning was to the success of the initiative. They thought if it worked the way it was supposed to and it was launched successfully and all the integrations worked, it was a success. And in reality, it's only a success if people use it the way it was intended, which requires training and performance support. So having a seat at the table or not having one early on is really a challenge for any time the system is implemented. The other thing that I noticed was as we began developing things, it felt like we were trying to hit a moving target. The application was changing all the time. We were trying to build content as early as possible so that we didn't have this fire drill at the end of the application launch. And so the system was always changing. We were always having to update documentation, whether it was in paper-based, whether it was tutorials, online tutorials, those types of things. So that was a real frustration. And it was just a given that we were going to have to be changing things over and over and over again until they froze the code, if you will. And lastly is I remember multiple implementations where the application went live and 2 weeks later they wanted to launch training. And so we felt like we were laying the runway as the plane was landing. We were just two weeks ahead of them. And so it really was a challenge to stay ahead and have it be accurate and reflect the actual features and functionality of the application. So that was really challenging, and it was always frustrating. It was just a given that it was going to be that way. Another challenge is anytime a system rolls out, they create what they call user acceptance tests. So this is how they document the functionality or the business process within the new application. And these become source documents for actually creating training, because for most people, at least most designers, and for myself, I'm not an expert in the application. And so I need this guidance from user acceptance tests as to how the application is actually supposed to work. So that if I were to create simulations or screen capture steps as to how to complete a task or a transaction, I would know where to go in order to be able to do that. And a lot of times, those user acceptance tests are sometimes not produced in a timely manner. And so that becomes a challenge. And another one, this is what I alluded to with laying the runway with the plane landing. Ultimately, before a product can launch, they have to sort of freeze the code and say, okay, this is what we're going to release to people. This is the functionality that's going to roll out. And we're no longer going to be programming in that particular instance of the software release. And so when that happens, that means, okay, the application's set. Now we can start create training that aligns with the features and functionality of that application. Well, if the code doesn't freeze until 2 weeks before it's supposed to go live, that really creates a challenge for people who are creating training. So the timing of and the availability of frozen code for content creation is often a challenge. And what flows from that is a lot of times, in order to get ahead of the game, we will sometimes check with the development team as to their level of confidence as to where they are in how the functionality will work. In other words, just 90% of the functionality or 80% or 100% of the functionality. So we'll start creating training materials before the application code is frozen, so we can get a head start on the development of content. And then what happens is when they actually freeze the code, we begin to see, okay, these are all the changes that took place since we started building content. And so you have to go through and you have to update all of the forms of content that you've created to match the application changes, whether it's instructor-led training, whether it's e-learning, whether it's job aids or virtual instructor-led training. And that's a challenge because they're usually all in different formats. And so if you've got 5 different forms of delivery, then you have to change it in 5 different places. And that's a challenge. That's difficult. Let's see. I think I have a polling question. I can't remember. Did I ask the question about training methods that apply to how you support the system? I have, haven't I?
Yep, we've got that one. I can launch it on the screen real quick, though.
No, well, have we already launched it?
Oh, no, we've not launched
it. We haven't. Let's go ahead and do that. So let's get a sense of how people are currently supporting system rollouts and user adoption.
Sure, and this one is multiple select. So if more than one of these apply to you, please do select them all.
Yeah.
Are you online training, simulated systems environments, classroom-based training with application sandbox, virtual ILT, application embedded electronic performance support system? How many of these are you using? Looks like people are still voting.
Okay, let's give them a
So
chance.
give them a couple minutes, but early reports, every single one of these has at least somebody in them. It looks like every single one of these has more than one person in them. So
yeah,
these are all being used. I'll go ahead and close this off. If you're going to vote, you've got 3 seconds. All right, and here's those results. So 78% are using online training in simulated system environments. 78% are also using paper-based tutorials, job aids, and reference guides. And then there's a mix of the others, with 57% in classroom-based training with application sandbox, 41% virtual ILT in sandbox or simulated system environment, and then 16% using the application embedded in electronic performance support system.
okay, thank you. So the graphic that I'm showing on the screen right now is representative of what they call a 70-20-10 principle, which means that 10% of learning happens during formal training. And everything we've been talking about so far is what we would call formal training. We're creating content, it's very content-centric, and it's usually done in an artificial environment to give people an opportunity in a high fidelity, low risk environment to learn, in this case, a system. The only trouble is that only 10% learning takes place there. And so then once they leave the classroom or leave the simulated screen, they're on the job. And 70% of job experience is where all the learning takes place. This is where experiential learning comes into play. And so the question is if only 10% takes place in formal training and we're spending all this time and investment in formal training and people aren't able to adopt the system or learn it as efficiently, as effectively as possible, what can be done in order to support them on the job? Because what happens is when you get involved in experiential learning, the time to proficiency shortens and the level of proficiency increases because they're able to actually do it on the job. They've got a specific transaction or specific task they need to perform, and either performance support or learner guidance in that work environment is where learning takes place versus a screen that they looked at 2 weeks before and then they can't remember it and they don't know where to go to be able to find that help. So that's part of the challenge, and part of the solution is how do you support people at the point of need? And it's true that there is a point of need when you go in a classroom-based training situation, but it's disconnected by time. So there is a need for them to learn the system, but they're not actually using the system yet. And so that difference between when they actually went through training, when they actually start using it, that disconnect, people drop off on their knowledge. They don't remember how to do it. And so how do you support them in the moment of need? And one of the ways that you do that is through what they call digital adoption platforms. And this is just a series of logos. I'm not trying to sell any of these, but I want to give you an idea that there are a number of applications that support what we call digital adoption. And the way that they do that is that in most applications that roll out now, they're browser-based. They're software as a service. They're cloud-based versus client and server-based. And so everything is delivered through a browser. And what that means is that these particular companies have built a body of code that allows them to embed help or performance support or tutorials or transaction demos or steps that walk them through the actual application in the browser. So instead of being in a simulated environment, they are in the live environment, and they can actually pick a particular transaction that they need help with, and it can literally walk them through the transaction in the live environment and actually complete their job. And that's what's unique. And what happens is all of the content, all of the learner guidance and the videos and the walkthroughs that become an overlay of the application are kept separate from the application. So there's a cloud that contains the content, and there's a cloud that contains the application. And then they're merged together into a performance support system. And let me show you a little bit what that looks like. Now, I have to apologize in advance because I went out and found some examples of these particular performance support systems, and I pulled them off YouTube and edited them down, and the resolution is horrible. But you'll recognize it as a Salesforce application, and I'm going to walk you through how this particular platform works integrated with an application. So this is just-in-time performance support in Salesforce. And what happens is you'll notice on the right here, there's an orange tab. And when you click on that, it brings up a series of transactions, and you're not going to be able to read it. It's horrible resolution. But the point being is that it says, you know, how do you set up an opportunity? How do you add a new client? And when you click on that, and you're in the live application, this isn't a simulated environment. When you click on it and you select one of those, it actually, in the live application, takes you to the first step of where you need to go. And it actually has some instructional text. And so if you click on it, it will actually take you to leads. And then within the next HTML frame of Salesforce, it will identify the next step that you need to take within the application to create a lead. And it's literally guiding you step by step by step as to how to do that. And you're actually doing it. You're not in a simulated environment. You're actually doing your job, if you will. And
with a digital coach.
With a digital coach, that's correct. Exactly. And some of these platforms are sophisticated enough that you can actually select walk me through it in the live environment, or you can actually select it to actually complete the task for you. It actually, you put the data in you want, or you identify what you want to complete done, and you can push a button and it'll literally, and you'll see the screen change, and it'll move and go do all the things that need to be done in order to get the transaction completed. So it's creating literally an automated movie that works in the live application and completes your task. It's sort of like a show me, but in real life versus in a high fidelity, low risk demo environment or video environment. So that's an example of how these digital platforms. And the reason why this is helpful is because when people are doing their job, they want just enough information to be able to get their job done. And this digital coach, if you will, gives the opportunity for them in the live environment to get that help that they need to complete a particular task or transaction. All right. Now, let me back up and show you that's one form of this performance support. The other one is these platforms give you the ability to publish content in multiple formats. So you may go into and author something and you can publish it as a video that just plays. And this will actually show you, or a slideshow that just shows you screen captures. And let me just play this so you can kind of get a sense. Again, apologies for the resolution. You kind of get the essence of what I'm trying to show. This little frame down below is actually a slideshow. And it's just a series of screen captures that were captured earlier. And they have the ability to advance through it and sort of see visually within the application the steps that they need to take in order to complete it. Well, let's say, okay, this is great, but I want to go out and actually do it. This gives them the ability to click where it says see live. It actually can click on that and it actually logs them into the application and takes them to where they are in the application and actually gives them the opportunity to complete those steps within the application itself. So you notice a pop-up came up and it's chosen where to click. So they were seeing it demonstrated with the slideshow earlier, and they said, I want to see this live in the actual application. They clicked on it and took them right to where they needed to go, logged them in, and showed them the steps to how to do it. Another example of sort of the digital performance support or digital coach of how to complete things. All right. That's another example of multiple forms of output. So you saw a slideshow as well as in-application performance support. The last one is the authoring environment. So what these companies do is they create, what's the word? They create I'll call it an add-in or a plug-in. You'll notice up here in the top, this is Salesforce. And let me just play this so you can see it as best we can see it. There is a little icon up there. And this icon is for this particular vendor, happens to be WhatFix. And when you click on that, it's calling up all the information in their cloud to begin authoring steps within the live platform. So you're in Salesforce, you're clicking that icon, and you're actually adding a step, add a lead in Salesforce. And then what happens is because it's HTML5, every single object on the page is a separate object, every label, everything. And you have the ability to mouse over and select where they need to click or where they need to enter data, and it actually captures it. So if you click on leads, you click on that, it then pulls up and is capturing the screen capture, and you have the ability to create the labels associated with what you want them to do when they click on lead. So you're authoring in the live application with a plugin that's embedded within the application to create these, I'll call them walkthroughs or transactional steps. And what happens is when you do this once, you have the ability to publish it to multiple formats. So this could be published to an instructor-led training manual with the screen captures. It can be published to a slideshow. It can be published to a job aid. So you create once and publish multiple times. And of course, it can be published to performance support in the live application. So that once you end up finishing and saving it, the transaction, you then give it a description and it becomes part of this help on the side so a person can be guided through that. All right. Now, the reason why I wanted to show that to you is because having been, my wife calls me up on the phone for technical support, how to use Word and Excel and PowerPoint. And it's very frustrating because things don't work the way they think she should. And what I wish I had was a digital coach who could walk her through things who wasn't emotionally connected to her, which is me. Because I say, I can't see what you're seeing, describe what you're seeing. And so if something like this could walk her through transactions as to how to set margins or how to change tabs or whatever it is, it'd be wonderful because she would have control over her learning. It would be just in time at the point of need, and I would experience a whole lot less frustration. I'm sort of personalizing, but the point being is at the point of need, people won't have the ability to get the information they need to be able to complete their job. And what happens is this is experiential learning at its finest, along with coaching. And the coaching happens to be a digital coach versus a life coach. And what happens is, because most of the learning takes place in experiential learning, it accelerates the onboarding process. People don't have to go through a week-long training class. They can actually literally go out on the application, see all the list of transactions that are related to the role that they would complete. They can select one and it literally walks them through them, or it plays it for them, or it guides them in one form or another as to how they want to complete that. Question?
So the comment has come around. It's very clear that this is super cool and that a lot of tech companies have started using these and applying them for the training. But how do we as L&D implement this solution? Is there an open source version? Do we think of this as another tool in our toolbox like Storyline? Do we try to go and find those kinds of things, or what's the best way for us to implement this into learning and development? And also, do some of the tools that you've shown work in any application, even those that are homegrown from our company, or do they only work in certain applications?
As long as it's browser based, it can work in any application. Now they do have these particular vendors, and I'm not representing them, and I don't know all the details of what they have, but they will probably have a list of applications where they have implementation examples to show you. But ultimately, if it's browser-based, it can work in anything, because behind the scenes, their code is grabbing the objects in the HTML. So it doesn't matter which application it is. And then you're just creating the sequence of the steps and capturing the visual of the transaction and providing learner guidance text within that. So short answer is yes, it could be it could be a homegrown application as long as it's browser-based. The other question was, so does this become additional work beyond a Captivate course or a Storyline course where we have to create training? I don't think it has to be. It all depends upon your willingness to learn a new system and create content in this the same way you would. You may have still some of the same issues as far as when is the code going to be frozen, when does the user acceptance test, when do they become available that we can use. But what's really critical from this perspective is you won't have as big of a fire drill. So let's say 80% of the application is final, and you start building content within one of these tools, and you've got walkthroughs and you've got videos and whatever name they take, and you're creating content, if you will, in the cloud. And all of a sudden the code is frozen and you realize that you've got 30% of it needs to be updated. Well, where the value comes from these is unless you're just creating simulations only, and you only have to do it one place, this gives you the ability to go in and update the content within a particular platform, any one of these, and then it automatically publishes to all the forms that it publishes to. So it updates job aids, it updates transactional walkthroughs, it updates ILT materials, either content or screen captures. So you only have to do it once, which is really important. Having done this myself, where I had to go out. Okay, I'm doing the ILT. I've got to go out and do the Captivate simulations. I've got to update everything. So it's update once and publish multiple places. So in that sense, it potentially could replace a Captivate type experience or a storyline experience in the training environment. It all depends upon, one is the features and functionality of these providers. I happen to have shown you WhatFix, and but all of these have potentially. The other area this has really relevance to is we've been talking about systems training for internal learning and development of employees, people who are adopting a system to serve the customer. Where these can really have power is if, let's say, you're selling a software as a service type product or solution, and you want this WalkMe, if you will, or this WhatFix, or this digital coach to actually be on the website of maybe a sandbox that you have, so the customer who's experiencing the platform, you can actually provide learner guidance to your consumer who's thinking of purchasing it. It actually shows them how the application works and walks them through it. That's where some of the real power comes from, actual product experience for the consumer versus learner experience as an employee trying to learn a system to complete their job. So it has lots of applications beyond just the employee.
So one of our viewers is saying that they use digital coaches as part of an overall training plan. So ILT or virtual ILT is implementation or pre-implementation training, and the digital coach is for ongoing pilot support and performance support. Which is
and that is absolutely correct, because usually when you have a system rollout, you have sort of super user training up early, and then you'll start rolling out to different user groups, the training. And the thing that's, and I appreciate them mentioning that, because in reality, this isn't intended to be a replacement for everything, because ultimately all the learning takes place. You get people up to speed just enough where they're sort of feeling comfortable, and then to actually do their job once it goes live. This is what supports it forever. This stays with an application forever, potentially. So you can onboard people more quickly. People can change roles and responsibilities and learn their job more quickly. So it potentially never goes away. You have this performance support system embedded within the application for the life of the application.
So do you think that having a digital coach will solve the problem of getting users to actually take the online training without complaining? Do you think this eliminates enough of their hurt, enough of their boredom, enough of their frustration and feeling? A lot of people that are going through training feel like their time is being wasted for one reason or another. Do you think this helps solve that problem?
Well, the problem is that boredom is they're experiencing before the application goes live. And so they haven't experienced the platform yet. They haven't experienced a digital coach yet. If you could somehow introduce the digital coach in a pre-launch training session and say this is going to be available to you for as long as the application's alive, it may create a level of excitement that may not be there. Okay, screen capture after screen capture, I click on this and it says not the right place. And I have to click on it 3 times for finally to show me a red box around where I'm supposed to click, versus giving a task and either maybe seeing a video of it actually being performed or actually being guided through it and being able to complete the task and actually have it be not a simulated environment. That could create higher relevance, more context, and experiential learning in a high fidelity, low risk environment, because it's a sandbox. Yeah, I think it could help. But if you're doing regular ILT training, 3 weeks before it goes live, and they're not going to experience a digital coach until it goes live, you're going to have a hard time creating, closing that gap of boredom and things like that. That's my opinion. That's not a fact. That's my opinion.
Sure. There's a lot of reasons people complain about training.
Right.
That may solve their problems. It might not.
So let me just share with you some of the intended benefits that can take place with an experiential learning approach with, I'll call it a digital coach. It can accelerate the onboarding because people are learning on the job. They're doing it. They're not in a classroom, in a simulated environment. And they've actually measured adoption levels increasing by 30%. And when I say 30%, means they're learning it more quickly and they're learning it more proficiently. That's where they're getting the 30%. It also enables self-service capability of online system products. So this is more of a consumer perspective. So if you've got an application that's consumer facing, you can embed these coaches within the application and enable people to be self-service and how to use it, those types of things. Customers don't have to read documentation. It's sort of embedded in the application. They can get what they want versus going to another manual or to another screen. It's right there in the application. The actual creation of the interactive guides take minutes. There's no coding involved. You don't have to be a programmer. And you can create training and documentation efficiency. If you're publishing it, if you're creating it once and publishing it to multiple formats, it reduces the time it takes to update content anytime you have a content change. And you can also create all of the different formats for how you publish content. Those are some examples of the benefits of this type of platform. What questions do you have?
Well, there's a question here. Why is eLearning Brothers talking about this? Are we involved in any actual client implementations of any of these platforms? Are we offering implementation? Do we offer consulting on this kind of implementation? Why is this an eLearning Brothers thing?
The reason why it's an eLearning Brothers thing is because these digital adoption platforms are becoming more and more prevalent. And they were created to address a specific need in the systems training world. And so we're choosing to adopt this adoption platform in a sense. Now,
so this is something that we're implementing.
We're working now. I haven't actually been through a project on this particular with this platform, but I've met with and talked to and began to learn about these platforms. And in fact, I know an opportunity with a company that was interested in the platform, but their timeline and the clarity of the scope was insufficient to bid on it. I've just received the lead for a SuccessFactors systems implementation this morning that I'll be proposing this digital adoption platform type of approach. And I've started researching these different clients. So this is a third-party partner that I have to work with. And it's possible that I could just refer them to them. So what happens is when you adopt one of these platforms, there's a licensing fee associated with the number of users to the client, and then there's content creation. You're still creating content, it just happens to be in a different platform from Captivate or Storyline. And so that content still has to be created and still maintained and updated. Mm-hmm. So it's either done by you internally as an organization, or in my case, because I'm bidding on something, it's done by us as an organization as part of my bid cost, or I'm referring it to the vendor, the WalkMe or the WhatFix of the world, and saying, have your services department provide the content creation. That's really not the road I want to go down, because I want to be able to add to my quiver of offerings that we can provide, this digital coach and this experiential learning, which is not taking place in the industry very much, and solve some of the challenges that people have of increasing adoption in a platform to realize the value. So absolutely, we're doing this. Sure. And if you came to me and said, can you help me with this? I would spend time researching and picking a partner, and would recommend a digital adoption platform approach, potentially in addition to or instead of whatever you're doing now. Sure. I don't have enough information.
I'm sure we've got plenty of ideas. You guys can schedule a consultation or a jam session, as Richard Vass likes to call it, to chat about these kinds of things. We also have done a lot of work with a platform called Trek that's a similar kind of thing.
Trek is not necessarily systems related. It can be, but it's experiential learning. And this is dealing specifically with systems and a specific technology that's embedded within the applications that people are implementing.
Sure, and we've done a lot of things for some of our other clients. 2 years ago, I think, at DevLearn, we had PayPal up on the stage, and we talked about some of the work we've done for them. Yep. And how there was some, not this style of digital coaching, but one sort of digital coach that was involved in the course and a part of the course, so that you could feel like you were getting not spoon-fed the answers, but the data that you need is right. Accessible and easily accessible as part of your course. And I think that this digital coach trend, I don't want to call it a trend, movement, is going to kind of be replacing those where you used to just click a button and there was an encyclopedia, more or less, right. Which was great for the time when it first came around. But these digital coaches, to be able to actually walk you through each step of each system, is very new, but also very
actually complete a transaction for you. They literally can program it so that you can push a button and it'll complete a transaction within the live system and to do your job for you, in a sense. least some of them,
very
not
cool.
all of them.
Very cool. One other question, would you say that this could be used for customer onboarding?
Is your onboarding involve a system? Does the customer need to interact with a system?
The answer to that is yes. I mean, with a lot of software as a service companies, you sign on. Even let's say you're going to log in and use Google. Google Drive. The first time you log into Google Drive, it essentially does the same thing.
Yeah.
It trains you on how to use it.
That answer is yes. And anytime you're asking people to interact with a platform or a system or a website, and you want to just guide them automatically or give them options as to how they go through the process, yeah, absolutely could be used.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. And has eLearning Brothers done any evaluation of individual platforms? I guess not, huh? We're just
I've had conversations with them, but not to the level of due diligence, so I feel comfortable recommending anybody.
Sure.
Well, I take that back. I've done a lot of due diligence on one because I bid on a project, but I'm not going to share that until I know more.
Right. And if you guys need more consulting on this kind of thing, Richard will find the right one for you. Richard will figure it out.
I have an interest in this, and so I'm willing to do the due diligence and figure out what is the optimal solution within the constraints of the project. You've got budget, you've got time, you've got features, functionality, and I don't know them all well enough to say, yeah, they're all great, they're equal. I don't know that, and so and you need and ultimately this solution may not be the best solution for what you're trying to do because either the license is too expensive or whatever reason. You have to look at the constraints and then see if it fits within the constraints you've got to deal with.
Very cool. We don't have any other questions at this time. Any more thoughts, Richard?
Let's see. Any more thoughts? No, I think if you'd like to talk further, I'd be happy to talk to you, answer questions. And if I don't know the answer, I'll tell you that and try and find it, and help you do your job better or help give opportunity to work together, one or the other.
So as you can see on the screen, Richard's information's up there. We'll also send out an email. In the email that includes a recording of this session, I'll also include Richard's email, and we'll just put your phone number in there too. If you want to just call him and chat, we'll be happy to give you that information. And we'd love to have a jam session with you, see how we can help, see what your projects need, and maybe there's something that we can help you with.
I do have one last polling question just to kind of gauge where people are. There's a polling question on experiential learning.
Are you currently using or planning to use experiential learning in your organization? And it doesn't have to be system related. As we mentioned, some of these don't necessarily talk about introducing a system, but you can click right on the screen and let us know where you're at. Are you currently using and tracking experiential learning? Are you formulated a plan for it but not implemented it yet? Do you have an interest in it but you're still quite a way out from considering and you're unsure how to start, like to learn more? That's why you're here, learning about better ways to drive adoption. I'll go ahead and stop and show those results. So there's 46% of our audience that's still 6 to 12 months out. 21% are currently using, which is great. And then 17% are both formulated a plan and not implemented it yet and unsure how to start but would like to learn more. So yeah, if you're not sure where to start or anywhere in this process, in any one of these steps, I'm sure Richard can help you find something that'll work out.
Thanks for listening, guys.
Thanks, everybody. We hope to see you guys next time.